Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave, and I am your man behind the screen. A few months ago, we discussed a little document released by Monte Cook Games that was called Consent in Gaming. And that document supposedly aimed to dissect the manner in which you can determine whether or not your players are giving you consent in gaming, and what you can do to ensure that their consent is always seen to. Throughout our look at that document, we determined that much more likely than not, that document was not going to help you determine the consent of your players, nor was it going to actually foster healthy gaming at the gaming table. But we're not here to actually discuss that document again. We're here to discuss a concept that was in existence before the release of that document, but which was mentioned in it. The X card. Now, what is the X card? Well, put simply, the X card is something you play, a phrase you call out, something along those lines, to stop play when things get uncomfortable for you in a game. It quite literally gives power to the players to completely halt a game on a word and say, no, you cannot do X, Y, or Z. It makes me uncomfortable. You have to do something different instead to the GM. There should be pretty obvious reasons why I am not a fan of such a tool. The abuse side of it alone is problem enough. However, recently, and by recently I mean just within the past few days, a very fine example of the complete failure of the X card came to light. Now, that failure came about in a live stream that was run by one Adam Koebel, who was streaming the game Dungeon World, and for context, Adam Koebel is the designer and creator of this game. Now, for full context, they were playing in a sci-fi setting for this game, and one of his 4 players was a female player who was playing a young robot boy. The players had ended up in a town or a spaceport, I'm not entirely sure, but to make a long story short, this little android boy was at a repair shop. Now, in character, Koebel lays out pretty thick that the repairman is a technophile. He is sexually attracted to robots, and he makes it clear with the way he speaks and the actions that he has this character take that he's attracted to the little android boy that this woman is playing. Now, as the scene draws on, you can see visible discomfort and awkwardness on the faces of the players. Everyone's face is visible in this stream, as is often the case. So, with that being the case, one would assume their faces should have been visible to Adam as well. Yet he carried the scene on. Now, the initial point where things were getting weird, but hadn't quite crossed the line, came with a big, awkward pause. Probably a good 15 to 20 seconds long of just painful, awkward silence. Every single one of the players just had a look on their face that said, this is kind of weird. I don't know if I want to do this. In most scenarios, this would be a point at which a GM who was paying attention, who was mindful of things, would stop and say, hey, so it's pretty clear this character is into your character. How do you want to proceed? And just let the player explain out what they want to do in response. And if things do go forward in that manner, fade to black and let it stand. That didn't happen. Instead, the long, awkward pause was followed by the woman playing this character mentioning out of character that her character wouldn't really understand what's going on. He wasn't programmed to understand these things. He wasn't programmed to have the idea of sexual relationships with a human as a concept in any way, shape, or form. And in character, then decides to pretty much say that they find it weird. He thinks it's a little odd. He's open to exploring new ideas, but this seems really strange. Essentially, for me, would have been a pretty clear sign of the player basically saying, without directly saying it, yeah, I don't know if I'm too into this. Adam did not take it that way. He pushed on with the scene, finishing it up by going into great detail as to how this repairman inserts a device into the robot's port and essentially brings the robot to what is, and I quote, the equivalent of a robot orgasm, going into such detail as to describe every pleasure transmitter flaring off to the point that this little robot boy's knees buckle and then the game ends. Every single player at this point had a look of incredible awkwardness on their face. None of them were enjoying this, but apparently in the after show, they were still joking, talking around, acting as normal. Now, one might think this is the end of the incident, but this turned into a bit of a controversy because the next day, every single player quit this game. Every single one of them. And the thing is, Adam made it clear throughout this series, apparently, that the X card was always available to be used. Yet no one used it, despite how visibly awkward and uncomfortable every single player was. Not a single one of them ever used the X card to stop that scene. And that's because the X card is ultimately useless. It does not work. It will never work. It is not fit for purpose. And here's why. X cards, things like that, they require a person who is comfortable enough with speaking out and saying, no, you're not doing that. You're going to stop. That requires a certain force of personality to do. But the kind of people who are most likely to need the X card, or at least feel like they're most likely to need it, they're not the kind of people who are going to have that force of personality. They're going to tend to be the people who are a little more socially awkward, who are a bit more shy, who are less self-assured. Especially in the face of someone who is a relatively popular figure within his brand of the gaming world, as Adam Koebel is. As a note, the live stream Adam was running had upwards of 10,000 viewers. He's not an unknown quantity. He's not an unknown name. He's designed a system that, for the crowd that he plays to, is relatively popular. And he has relative popularity compared to most of us, certainly compared to someone like myself, who's, just a few hairs past 200 subscribers on YouTube and only at about 50 on BitChute. Needless to say, my following isn't exactly substantial. This guy, compared to most of us, pretty substantial. So it makes sense that his players probably didn't feel comfortable calling him out and telling him to stop using this device because, well, he's the big name in the room. He's the popular guy who came in. He's the one hosting the stream. He's the one who made the game they're playing in. He has that force of personality. They clearly did not. It also doesn't help matters that the X card puts, at least in perception, an enormous target on the back of the person using it. It puts the players in a position where they are forced to curtail the course of the game, whether they like it or not, for everyone at the table, not just themselves. Whether it truly does so or not, that sort of forceful action always makes people feel like they've got a target on their back. Like they might be bringing on the ire of someone else, particularly when you're looking at your GM and telling them, no, stop, you can't run the game this way. You have to do it this way, my way, because I'm not okay with this. Most of the time, this isn't going to be a problem at most of our tables. Most of the time, especially when we're gaming with friends, with people we know, we're going to be able to read the room. We're going to be able to understand when things are going too far, and we're going to be able to know that, hey, let's stop, let's pull back, this is going too far, it's time to fade to black. Generally speaking, the adults among us, we know how to do that. We've more or less learned that skill. The X card bypasses that skill, though. It bypasses it by forcing all of that responsibility and power into the hands of the one person who might be not uncomfortable with the scenario. But as we've established, those people are oftentimes not going to really be brave enough to call that out, because they're going to feel that if they do, well, they're disappointing everybody. They're going to be disappointing the GM, they're going to be stopping play for the other players, and in so doing, the feeling then becomes that they've invited the anger of everyone else onto themselves. Quite simply, it forces the self-conscious to break their self-consciousness, a very difficult thing to do. And I can speak from experience. It took me many, many years to get to the point where I was brave enough that I felt like I could talk in front of a group of people, much less where I had the willingness to finally branch out and say, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I'm going to talk about this hobby that I love. I'm going to do this thing and put myself out there and risk the criticism and the jeers of people who might not like me. It takes a long time to break away from that kind of thing. It's not something that you can do on a whim just by lifting up a card and saying, no, I don't want to do this. Because generally speaking, the people who most need to do that don't feel comfortable with it. Which then means that the people who do feel comfortable with it, the ones who are the most powerful in terms of their force of personality, well, that gives them an avenue of abuse. That gives them a way to start dictating the way things go in the game. Now, this is, of course, not to say that people who have a forceful personality are going to do this. There's obviously no guarantee that they're going to use this to abuse people in their games or force things to go a certain way that they like. But the potential is there, and the potential is strong. However, this situation showed another potential for abuse, one that is much more duplicitous, much more underhanded. And I do want to make clear, I do not know Adam Koebel personally. I can't speak with 100% certainty as to whether or not his apology the next day was or was not genuine. My general stance is to take things in the best light possible, especially when I don't know much of a person. However, Adam Koebel has a bit of a reputation for being the type who would condemn others that he disagrees with personally and politically. He's apparently well regarded for being the type of person that does this sort of thing. And unfortunately, in his apology, he did not take accountability for his own stance, or for his own actions in this, but instead blamed the fact that the X card wasn't played, and decided to place himself in a place of ignorance, saying, I did not realize that my players felt that uncomfortable. No one played the X card. I didn't know. But if they had done that, I would have stopped. So I apologize profusely. I am so sorry for any women that may have been hurt or made uncomfortable by this. And I would have stopped if someone played the X card, but I didn't know. I like to try and be charitable. But I find it very difficult to do so in this case, because of the fact that this has been an ongoing stream. He has played with these people for a long time. He should be able to look up at the screen and recognize these people are clearly uncomfortable with this. You should know to fade to black at that point. Now, I'm not willing to attribute malice to the instance at hand. It seemed like he did personally find it kind of funny to push that and be a little bit edgy. But I am going to say that doing so, when he has apparently called out many people as being some of the worst things in the book for doing things that are much more innocuous than this in their games, and then turning around and failing to take accountability by blaming the fact the X card wasn't played, ostensibly blaming the players for not telling you, no, stop, you have to do it this way instead. That right there is an entirely new form of abuse that the X card opens up. It removes accountability from the people who make these grievous errors, whether intentionally or not, by allowing them to shrug their shoulders and say, well, I didn't know. No one played the X card. How could I have possibly known they were feeling uncomfortable? They never played it. I made it an option, but they didn't use it. It's the fact that they didn't use that. That's what's at fault here. I don't like to use the terminology because I don't really care for the idea of there being victims of roleplay. I personally find that to be a bit silly, but I can't think of a better term to use than victim blaming. The X card opens up people who are at tables using the X card to be blamed for not using it if they get uncomfortable and a situation like this arises. So with this myriad of problems plaguing the X card and its use, with the issues of how easily it can be abused, how difficult it is for the types of people who would normally need something like this to actually use it because of the perceived target it would place on them, and the ways in which it can allow less scrupulous GMs to just hand-wave accountability away for when they do something stupid. What use is it? What good does it actually bring to the table? The clear answer is none. It has no use. It provides no good. It does absolutely nothing that the standard tools of human communication that we are expected to learn and understand as we grow, to say nothing of the fact that we are expected to learn and understand them as rules of etiquette for playing these social games, don't do better. Learning the attitudes and behaviors of your players, learning to read the air in the room, the attitude at the table, learning what people are or are not for, learning how to calmly and politely discuss when issues come up without making it an accusatory thing and forcing someone to stop what they're doing and change everything right at the tip of a hat. Learning how to actually communicate with one another is a much more powerful, much more useful tool than the X card has any hope of ever being. And it's for that reason that the X card is a complete, unabashed failure. Anyway, that's all I have on that subject for today, friends and gamers. If you liked the video, please feel free to leave a like, comment below with your thoughts. What do you think about the X card? What do you think about the similar tools that are being pushed for and for use in cons and public events like this? Do you really think they have any use? Can you think of any way in which they are actually helpful that can be demonstrated? I'd love to know, because from my experiences, from what I have always seen ever since I learned about this thing, it is always blown up in the faces of the groups that have tried to use it. I have never once seen that thing successfully used in any way that didn't spread some kind of animosity or, as in the case here, ultimately lead to the collapse of the group with the GM hand-waving away the accountability for their own actions. So please tell me what you think about that device in the comments down below. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. Open up the description box down below to follow in my social media pages. Check out my BitChute page. Unfortunately, we are still having problems with the videos not mirroring there correctly. I noticed that my Palinor vlog never got uploaded there, so I'm going to have to upload that today. But nevertheless, we'll get that figured out. And yeah, make sure to check out Phoenix Rising and keep an eye out for more content in the future. So, friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen. And remember, in the world of tabletop gaming, you don't just want to watch, you want to play. But more importantly, when issues come up at your table, you want to talk them out. Discuss them like adults. Be mature, be calm, be rational. For God's sake, don't rely on the X card. Have a good one.
And Johnny has, for the first time in his entire life, whatever the equivalent of a robot orgasm. Right there, it hits you like a truck. Your whole system just like lights up with like positive experience indicators, and your vision like flickers and blurs. Your temperature sensors all go haywire for just a second. Your knees buckle slightly. And I think maybe that's the last shot. I think that's the shot of the episode, is Johnny getting his brain stimulated.